much for giving me this opportunity to give you a few of my ideas. You remember in finance there's something called the black swan, which is the time we never expect an event to happen, but when it happens it is catastrophic, like in the 2008 period. What I'd like to say is the events I see in the oil side, the security in the Middle East, lead me to the conclusion that we should expect an oil price of about $80 and a gas price of about $10. This is in the long predictions of all the long-term planners today. But why am I coming to that conclusion? Because in order to achieve those two objectives, we don't need more than 3 people in one room for 1 hour. These 3 people are President Putin, President Rouhani, and Minister of Defense Mohammed bin Saleh. Together, these 3 represent 50% of the oil reserves in the world. Together, these 3 represent 50% of the gas reserves in the world. Together, these 3 have 25% of the production of oil today in the world. Therefore, by historical and geographical accident, 3 nations can combine and work out their differences. And why are they going to do that? If they agree only on 60% increase of the price of oil today, and I'm not talking about 73 where we went from $1 to 12, and we always go because oil is a weapon and oil is geopolitics. In this particular case, when you just have 3 nations that can exercise such power, and after they walk out, the result is $3 trillion for them in the next 10 years. Now, what is $3 trillion? China sweated for 40 years to put $3 trillion reserves. United States lost $3 trillion in the last 15 years, which changed all its politics. They lost $1 trillion in the 2008 financial crisis, which they never expected to happen, but happened. There's another $1 trillion that was lost in Baghdad, where we thought we would bring democracy to the Middle East, and another $1 billion in Afghanistan. Therefore, when you depend on people who think they have the solutions, and nobody has more resources than the US in terms of making predictions, and yet some major issues we were wrong. Vietnam, Afghanistan, Iraq, and the so-called Arab Spring, which was completely misread, ended up by being an Arab winter. And because of these factors, I believe that when these 3 people get together, there is too much at stake for them not to agree. Now, what are the disagreements and motivations? For Russia, a ruble at 65 is a real catastrophe for this big nation. And we mustn't forget that this big nation has played an important role in our recent history, where we never thought, at least I never thought, I would be one day alive without a Cold War. They stopped the Cold War, they blew up the Warsaw Pact, and what did they get in return? A NATO which is still expanding. I know we have some issues, Ukraine, Georgia, but these are peanuts compared to where we were. And our people with a lot of greed don't see that there are red lines. Therefore, Russia being an important player and an important energy player, and I would tell you, the only reason Mr. Putin came to Syria, it's because of oil and not because of Syria. Now, the counterparty to that is that we need Saudi Arabia to follow. Saudi Arabia has for many years been protected by America, and therefore, when you have too many crutches, you don't have muscles anymore. Today, they're on their own. They have a brilliant leader, 30 years old, but so was Alexander and Napoleon. And he has decided to find certain solutions. Up to now, the dialogue between the Russians and them has not yet found a practical side, because there's various cultural differences. And the third player in the room is, of course, Iran. And Iran today is a key player in the Middle East, has been for history's sake, always. Under the Shah, it's Iran that took the price up. There were 3 players in 1973. I was involved in the back channels. It was the Shah of Iran from $1.80 who took it to 12. We got King Faisal to follow him, but we needed a third person, and that was President Sadat. Because if you want to increase the price, the other side of the coin is a military operation. And if you want to do a military operation like Sadat, who knew he could not win against Israel, he needed the oil weapon. And all of a sudden they got married, and in 7 months we never saw the price of oil back to where it is. 43 years later, I see the same situation now in the next 24 months. You cannot keep a nation like Russia or Iran under such pressure, because also it's a weapon which is being used against them. It's true that the price of oil collapsed because of shale, but it could have been stopped by Saudi Arabia if they wanted to. They thought they could use it today to hurt their enemies. But the impasse of the Middle East is leading us nowhere. So, in my belief, when there's $3 trillion available, even enemies become friends. I know I've heard other speakers this morning talking about the difficulty of Iran, and that it's very difficult to come to an ideological agreement with them. But you know, even ideology is used. Let's not forget the Catholics in history was much worse than ISIS. Who did the Inquisition? ISIS, to me, is a very small passing stage, which doesn't, it's not the military option which is missing, it's the political decision. Just imagine if these 3 gentlemen decide politically that they want security in the Middle East. Without America, without NATO, because forget America and NATO now, they have their own problems. Today we have to find regional stability. And in the region, the players are Turkey, Israel, Egypt, Saudi, Iran, and one external player, which is the Russian player. He decided to come in. Would anybody have ever imagined that Mr. Putin would arrive in Syria and back Mr. Bashar against NATO, against human rights, against everything else? But you know what? He's right. Because the alternative is much worse. And politics is only a choice of the lesser evils. Today we're following him. I think the next step, and especially Iran is a big problem with Saudi, but Iran is completely dependent on Russia, on weapons and on the rest. As you see, they're together in Syria with Hezbollah, unfortunately. But all these things are only symptoms that can get solved. because the issues are much bigger. Now, I know people externally believe that the religious war between Shia and Sunni is there for a few thousand years. It has been there, but we've also had ideological wars in the past. We've had the major Cold War with the West on one side and Russia on the other side and China on the other side. Now, what did we do with these ideological differences? We didn't go nuclear war. That's over. We channeled that energy in elsewhere. And I see the Shia and the Muslims and the Sunnis agreeing on a new Sykes-Picot. Not that any of them will be happy, but there's no compromise that makes everybody happy. But that compromise for $3 trillion, I assure you, is worth the play. Thank you very much.